Okay, so I'm going to say something that's going to sound weird and then I'm going to explain it. The student who prepared the hardest for the placements this year, some of them did not get placed first, and some of the people who got placed early, including at genuinely good product companies, had shorter preparation than almost everyone around them. I'm not saying preparation doesn't matter. I'm saying the kind of preparation that people default to in our colleges, the kind everyone on YouTube tells you to do, is increasingly disconnected from what 2026 interviews actually tested for. I went through the whole thing. I'm the final year student at a reputed college, and I just got placed as a software engineer for 2026, and I built SaaS products as the side hustle. So I was watching this placement season from two angles. As a student going through it, and as someone who thinks about software and products every single day, there are four or five things about this placement season that genuinely caught me off guard. Things I haven't seen any other video talk about honestly. So that's what this is. No fluff, let's go. Before I get into it, quickly, why should you listen to me and not one of those placement experts who make these videos? Honestly, that's a fair question. Here's my answer. Most placement advice on YouTube is from people who are 3, 4, or 5 years out. And which means they are giving you advice from a completely different cycle, pre layoffs, pre AI tools going mainstream, pre the entire vibe shift that happened in Indian tech hiring from 2022 onwards. I just finished literally this cycle. I sat in online assessments, I gave interviews, I watched my batchmates go through it in real time. I talked to people who got placed early and people who were still waiting in December. I have zero distance from this right now, and I think that's actually more useful to you than someone with 5 years of hindsight giving you polished career advice. Also, I'm not going to pretend placements at my college are some perfect system that works for everyone. It doesn't. And I'll talk about that too. One more thing, I'm going to mention one specific thing I noticed happening in interviews that almost nobody was preparing for. I'll get to it, but keep that in your head because I think it's the single most important practical thing I say in this video. Okay, let's actually get into it. So here are the four things that I think genuinely define how placement in 2026 are different. Number one, the DSA meta has not changed, but the reason they are testing DSA has completely changed. Here is the thing. When AI tools became mainstream, a lot of students, genuinely smart students, started assuming that DSA rounds would become less important. Like if you can just use Copilot or ChatGPT to code, why would a company still test you on the binary search and DP, right? And I get why people thought that. It sounds logical, but what actually happened is the opposite. Product companies tightened their DSA rounds, specifically because they know every candidate is using AI for their day-to-day work. So the interview is one of the only places they can still test the raw problem solving. They're not testing can you write a loop, they're testing can you think under pressure when there is no autocomplete. The cutoff didn't go down. At some companies it went up. And the problem got more obscure, not easier. So if you are a second or third year watching this and you thought you'd coast on the vibes and the AI tools, I'm not going to lie, that's risky. The floor didn't drop, it got higher. Number two, the mass recruiter situation is not genuinely what your seniors told you. The batch right before us, 2025, a significant chunk of students who got offer from big service companies in their final year were still waiting for joining dates many months later. Some offers were delayed by over a year, and some got rescinded quietly. This was a real thing, and this was even in the news. Now, did that get fully resolved by the time 2026 rolled around? Partially. But here's what it did to our batch's mentality. And this is something I genuinely didn't see coming. It made people who would have been perfectly happy with a TCS or Infosys offer anxious in a way previous batches weren't. Like getting a mass recruiter offer felt less like a safety net and more like an uncertainty. And that anxiety pushed a lot of people towards product companies they weren't fully prepared for, which created its own weird pressure. Look, I'm not saying mass recruiter companies are bad. That's not my point. My point is the way students were thinking about them changed. And if you are building your placement strategy around how it worked for students 3, 4 years ago, you are working with outdated information. Number three, CGPA cutoffs are both more and less relevant than everyone claims, and nobody explains this correctly. Here is the honest truth. At most product companies that came to campus, and I mean the actual good ones, not just the brand names, the CGPA cutoff is a filter and not a ranking system. They use it to reduce the pile 7, 7.5, and sometimes even 8 for a few companies. Once you are above that number, your CGPA is basically done doing work for you. What I noticed this year specifically, and this surprised me, is that companies were paying more attention to GitHub profiles and live projects than most people expected during the shortlisting phase. Not all of them, but enough that having something real to show, something you actually built and deployed, was genuinely differentiating. Not in a add a project to your resume way, in a this person actually ships things way. I build SaaS products on the side, and I cannot tell you how many times that came up in the conversation during interviews in a genuinely organic way, not as a flex, but just as a data point that said something about how I work. Which brings me to the number four, and this is the one I want you to really sit with. Okay, so number fourth is the interviews themselves changed in a way that almost nobody prepared for. I'll explain exactly what I mean in the next section because this is the most practical thing I have to say and I want to give it the full space it deserves. Okay, so what actually moved the needle this year? Let me be really specific here because this is the part where most videos go vague and I want to go the opposite direction. First, the interview itself changed shape. In previous years, at the entry level, freshers coming out of college, most companies at campus kept the bar relatively simple. DSA, maybe one HR round, and then done. System design was considered a senior level territory. That line has moved. I had multiple interviews, including at companies I would not have expected this from, where they asked me walk through how I would design something. Not a full distributed system design, but things like how would you structure this database? How would you choose this API design over that one? What happens when this part fails? The students who had built actual projects and not tutorial clone projects, not I followed a YouTube course and made a to-do app project, but students who had made decisions in the code and could talk about why they made those decisions, they were so much more comfortable in these conversations. Because when you have shipped something real, even something small, you have opinions. You know why you chose Postgres over MongoDB. You know why you structured your APIs a certain way. And that's exactly what they are probing for now. Not book knowledge, actual engineering judgment. This was a bigger unlock than almost anything I saw. Second, lead code hard is not a differentiator you think it is. Now I'm going to say something that will upset some of you. Granting 400 lead code problems in 3 months while neglecting everything else is probably not the optimal strategy for most placements right now. And I know people will disagree with this. And here's my reasoning. Almost everyone coming into campus placements at any decent college has done some DSA preparation. So the floor is higher. Where people were differentiating themselves this year, especially at the product companies, was in the other 40% of the interview. Communication, system thinking, how they talked about their projects, how they handled being stuck. These were the parts where they were tested actually. Two students, similar DSA performance. One had only done lead code and could barely explain their internship project. Other had done solid DSA and had a deployed app they could walk through and defend technical decisions on. The second person got further. And I watched this happen multiple times. I'm not saying skip lead code. I'm saying don't let lead code eat the whole preparation plate. Third, and this one I genuinely did not see coming, communication and code reviews. A couple of companies this year, I'm not deliberately naming them, introduced a step I hadn't heard of before in the campus interviews. They sent you a code snippet, sometimes their actual code base, and asked you to review it, like leave comments. What's wrong with this? What would you change? What would you ask the author about? And this was a real engineering skill, and almost nobody was prepared for it. Because in lead code preparation, you are always the person writing the code. You almost never practice reading other people's code critically. If you are in a second or third year and you watch nothing else, go read code. Not just your own, open source projects, PRs on GitHub, your seniors' old project repos. Get comfortable having opinions about code that isn't yours. Fourth, off campus got more competitive but also more accessible. The on campus route, especially for students at tier 2 colleges, has always been the more reliable path for a certain type of company. But what changed this year is that the companies students actually wanted, the product companies, the startups with good ESOPs, the MNCs that weren't coming to campus, those off campus opportunities became genuinely accessible in a way they weren't before. AngelList, LinkedIn, cold emails, referrals. I know multiple people from our batch and similar batches who got roles this way that were better than what came to campus. It's slower and harder and more uncertain, but the ceiling is higher. If you are someone whose dream company doesn't visit your campus, that door is not closed. It's just a different kind of effort. Okay, so moving on to the fifth section of this video, the thing nobody talks about, the mental side. I want to talk about something that no placement video talks about, and I know some of you are going to screenshot this part or come back to it at 2 a.m. during the placement season. So I want to say it properly. Placement season is genuinely one of the most psychologically rough things I have experienced in college, and I am someone who had a decent outcome. I cannot imagine how heavy it was for people who waited longer. And here's what nobody tells you. The anxiety isn't really about the interview. The interview is actually the easiest part. You walk in, you do your best, and you walk out. The anxiety is about the 3 weeks between the interviews where you are watching other people post their offer letters on LinkedIn and you are trying to figure out if you are behind. And LinkedIn during placement season is genuinely toxic for this. I cannot tell you how many times I'd open LinkedIn after a rough online assessment, see a batchmate post a dream offer, and see my stomach drop even though I was genuinely happy for them. Those two things coexist and it's confusing and nobody talks about it. I'm going to say something that I was embarrassed about for a while and I am over being embarrassed about it. I had a week in August of 2025 where I genuinely did not perform well in two back-to-back interviews. Not because I didn't know the material, because I was sleeping bad. I was in my head about what it meant if I didn't place by a certain date. And that mental noise was louder than my preparation. I came out of those interviews knowing I had underperformed and that feeling was awful. So you may ask me what helped me, and I'm not going to give you meditation advice. That's not what it is. And it was honestly just having one or two people I could be completely honest with about how I was feeling, not performing okayness, actually saying that I'm struggling right now. That broke the pressure valve every time. If you are going into placements and you have one friend you can be genuinely honest with, that is more valuable than any productivity hack. And if you are currently in it and it's not going well, please hear this from someone who has been there. The timeline that everyone in your college makes you feel is the only acceptable one is not real. People get placed in December, in February, off campus. People take gap years and come back stronger. The story isn't over at the placement deadline. It's genuinely isn't. Okay, if you made it this far, I want to say something straight. If you are in a second year or third year watching this, you have time. You genuinely have time. The things I talked about are not rocket science. Build something real. Do your DSA consistently without panic. Think about companies you actually want to work for, not just the ones that came to your campus. And don't let the placement circus convince you that your worth as an engineer is tied to which company picks you in 2 month window in the final year. That's a stupid metric, and everyone who has been out for a year or two knows it. If you are in a final year right now and it's not going the way you expected, I know this sounds hollow from the outside, but you are in the middle of the story. The people who took a step back, regrouped, and came back with a clearer head, I have watched them land better outcomes than people who got placed early and coasted. This video is me putting down what I wish someone had told me 2 years ago. Probably a few things I said are wrong or won't hold by the time your placement season rolls around. Things change fast, but the core of it, build real things, stay honest with yourself, don't lose the plot to anxiety. I think that holds. Alright, if this was useful, subscribing actually helps me a lot. It tells me this kind of raw, honest content is what you want more, and which is the only content I want to make anyway. And if you want a next thing to watch, I made a video recently on AI projects that actually stand out on a resume, not the generic chatbot stuff. Actual projects that gave people something real to talk about in interviews. That one's linked in the description. Now go build something. I'm watching you.